Hi, good evening. Welcome to the Nightcast News and Commentary. And please forgive me while I try to mess with my... So I got this light. If I can... Oh, there we go. I like that. See if I can... Ooh, that's not bright. Let's turn that down a little bit. Okay. Well, all right. Welcome to episode 4, A House Divided. And tonight, I want to talk to you guys about something that a lot of people have been talking about. When's it all going to hit the fan? Is everything going to break down into full, breakdown of law and order, civil unrest, complete decay? Are we there? Are we getting there? Is it inevitable? Are we already there? And what does that actually mean? So, how we got here, I think, is kind of interesting because, back in my 20s, we used to spend, I don't know if you guys remember this or if any of you did this, but me and my social circle, a lot of people I know, we spent most of our 20s sitting around Denny's and IHOP, playing D&D or Rifts. And a very popular topic of conversation was, what do we do when it all goes kablooey? If there's a volcano, if this dam collapses, if everything just completely falls apart, where do we go from here? And, we had a lot of survival prepping during Y2K. I think that was a big thing that got people thinking about what happens when there's no longer food in the grocery stores, there's no longer hydrogen peroxide in the pharmacies. What happens when there's no real law and we're all stuck contending with each other for resources that are no longer being produced and manufactured? And so my generation has been entertaining the possibility of that kind of societal meltdown for a little more than 20 years. And it's kind of the origin story, really, for the popular American cultural fiction of the zombie apocalypse. That's kind of a worst case scenario. What if it's a disease? What if it's something just completely uncontrollable and totally fantastic that is preventing us from, going to Winco? And as many times as we entertained it as a fiction, something that I remember we said all the time was, well, what I'll do is I'll run and I'll go grab guns, or I'll go get a truck, or, so right off the bat, there's this feeling of inevitability. This is what I will do. There's plan of action. And the commitment I noticed on every single person's part to survive. We're all absolutely convinced we're gonna survive. We have the skills, And I don't think that we spend a whole lot of time really particularly necessarily noting some of the more devastating realities that would go along with all of that. But it didn't matter because it was really, when we were kids, it was more a thought experiment. It was a game people would play. How do you head for the hills? And the rhetoric for that game has gotten decidedly sharper since George W. Bush. During George W. Bush, I don't know if you guys remember, but towards the end there, and in fact, off and on throughout Barack Obama's entire administration, many states talked about, at least vaguely talked about, seceding. Texas is never not talking about seceding. The state of Utah very much prides itself on neither being secessionist, nor exactly do they consider themselves fully. And this isn't everybody in Texas. Of course, the Texas state legislature, this would not apply, or the Utah state legislature, this would not apply to them. The legislature is United States legislature, right? But there are people in the state of Utah who are like, well, the United States annexed us. So yeah, we're only here because it's convenient for the moment. The state of California was talking about seceding a couple of years ago. There's a movement for Cascadia, which is the idea that Washington, California, Oregon, possibly along with grabbing Colorado, might all form a larger coalition state and either become our own country or join Canada. There's been talk about separating the United States into larger but more autonomous geographic regions, based either on culture and language. Language does change, across the United States. The way we use language, we have 11, I believe, distinct dialect areas that have their own distinct dialect. But I think most of the time the talk is about 5 or 6 sort of larger, more independent, possibly connected, but possibly not, nation states. Not only are people talking about secession, more people are talking about segregation. Marjorie Taylor Greene, somewhat notoriously, called for a divorce. There's this idea among a lot of people, and I'll give you the numbers on how many people. It's kind of surprising. There's an idea among a lot of people that we can just take everybody who's on the left and we can stick them over here, and we can take everybody who's on the right and we can stick them over here. And that is not going to work for so many reasons. So many reasons. It's an idea that bears some examination, but it's also an idea that doesn't have a practical path. My mother, for example, is Republican. She's not a Trump-supporting Republican. She's what one might call a traditional Republican, or I've heard the term Rockefeller Republican. But she lives in California. It's a very blue state. You couldn't drag her kicking and screaming back to Arizona, where she's from, which is a red state, but she doesn't want to live there. Her family doesn't live there. Her children don't live there. And she has children who are largely as left as they come. You can't just divvy up territory and say, okay, everybody who believes in abortion, you guys get this territory over here, and you people who don't believe in abortion, you get this territory over here. And that's just one line. There's all these shifting factions. So are we nearing a state of possible civil war, or is this just all overblown rhetoric? So we've been talking about corruption and how corruption is causing people to lose a lot of faith in the government. And that brings us to a poll that was done here in 2021. It was a national survey. The pollster is John Zogby. Found that a plurality of Americans, 46%, believed a future civil war was likely. 43% felt it was unlikely. 11% were not sure. That's talking about whether it's likely. Now, when you do these polls and when you ask likely or not likely, one of the things you don't see is the number of people who will say, well, I mean, we need one, but it's not likely. So believe it or not, then the pollster actually then puts unlikely. But the person might say, "May I hope we can avoid it. I mean, we're doing everything possible to avoid it, but I don't see another way out. I mean, I guess it's likely." So then that answer goes in as likely. So polls don't give when you're looking at the final results here, they don't give you any nuance. They just give you some hard data, and that data can be mitigated by a number of factors that the poll isn't going to take into account. But there we have it. 46% of Americans, that's nearly half, believed a future civil war was likely. 43% felt it was unlikely. 11 were not sure. 11%. War seemed more likely for younger people than older ones, and that's 53% and 31% respectively. And for those residing in the South was 49%, Central Great Lakes region 48%, relative to those in the East, which is 39%. So even that lowest number given is really high, nearly 40%. And when I read this, something jumped out at me, just really, really startling, jumped out at me. Because here's how it actually reads. I found 5 or 6 articles that reference this poll. They all used the same wording. This is what they said in all of them. For those residing in the South, 49%, Central Great Lakes region, 48%, relative to those in the East, 39%. So are the Rocky Mountains central now? And what about the Northwest? What about the Pacific Coast? Like, when they say the South, do they mean the Southwest? Does that include Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas? Or do they mean the area traditionally defined as the Deep South during the Civil War era, before Texas was a state? It's not very clear. And so what's bothersome about this poll, and how often it was referenced in the news without any mention of this all week long, is that it didn't show answers relative to race. It didn't show answers that included the entire country. It's clearly leaving out almost 50% of the populated nation. If you include California, Oregon, Washington, and the Mountain Time Zone, which it really does not make clear here. Like, when it says central, does it just mean the plains and the Midwest? How far did it cut central off? How far west? So it's leaving out millions and millions of people. And then the news went ahead and said, hey, check this out. 46% of Americans believe that. Well, I can't tell you 46% of Americans believe that, because I don't know how much that overall percentage changes if you include the West Coast. Does it go up? Does it go up to 48%? Does it go up to 52%? Does it go down? Are people on the West Coast way less likely to be entertaining that idea? Now, I actually kind of find that, I would find that surprising. It's been my experience. I'm a West Coast girl. I was born in California. I now live in Oregon. But it's been my experience that the West sort of prides itself on being the wild, wild West. We'd almost be the first to jump ship just because we're like, woohoo, don't fence me in. Like, that's written right into our hippie culture over here. Those of us who follow that. And that brings this up. That is not a characterization that you can apply to the entire West. That really only applies to the population centers. Portland, Albany, Eugene, San Francisco, LA, San Diego, big population centers. We know this. Even in red states, large population centers often vote blue, and rural areas often vote red. And you cannot ask people to just upend their whole life so that they can resituate themselves into somebody else's idea of where they geographically belong. Do you really want some group coming up to you and saying, I'm sorry, well, this zone's been designated for just the LGBTQ, and you're awfully straight, so you're going to have to leave? Well, of course not. You'd find that outrageous. And you should also find it outrageous when people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others suggest that people from California are insane and that California should be kicked out of the United States and that anybody leaving California should have to wait 2 years to vote because they need to be unbrainwashed. People are not that simple. We just aren't. Now, unfortunately, we do have all this codified corruption that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. The U.S. Postal Service got red handed being apparently within the U.S. Postal Service, there is a wing, a branch department that has been helping the Department of Homeland Security as an information gathering, spying on Americans. That's happening. And if the bombshell report came out, it went away just as quickly. All of that immediately got buried under news about what a horrible Postmaster General DeJoy is. Now, there's no question that Postmaster General DeJoy is not what the post office would need in any time, much less in this particular time. But the post office was doing this before Trump came into office. The post office has been doing this for a long time. It has nothing to do with DeJoy. And then the news of that got, hushed away. But not before Americans read it. They'll hope you'll forget. But for just a moment, when you read that headline, chances are you rolled your eyes and you said, oh, I'm not surprised. That figures. Or something else like that. And the reason is because the average American, at least 46% of us, have no reason whatsoever to believe that any part of this system is still working for us or has the best interest of average citizens at heart. And everything is being framed now in terms of you're on this side or you're on that side. Partisanship is being pushed. Either voting rights are in incredible danger and we need to absolutely secure the sacrosanct right of every citizen to vote unimpeded, or we've got voter fraud all over the place. But you're being forced to take a position there. One of two things. Which do you think it is? And then you're being asked to support only the people who vote this way or only the people who vote that way. And every week you are given a new battle line. Do you want to kneel with Colin Kaepernick? Or do you want to stand up for the flag? And here's the thing. Both sides absolutely believe that they are the patriots. It's the other guys who have it all wrong. They're just misguided. They have it all wrong. We don't want to give each other credit for observations that may hold some water if we don't like the rhetoric that they came couched in. And so at the people level, at the partisan level, the bickering is getting more and more toxic. And there's no place where this is more visible than on a Facebook comment section. You can just read through It takes no time at all for the sides to quickly discover where they are and then begin just this terrible social breakdown. Just this week, I got into a lengthy Facebook argument with somebody who is a dyed-in-the-wool Hillary supporter, moderate Democrat, what I would call a corporate Democrat. He thinks I'm nuts. He thinks I'm a pie-in-the-sky idealist. I think that his ilk will moderate us into slow stagnation and ultimate death. Nobody infights like the leftists, okay? Man, our infighting is legendary. If you want a good look at just how legendary leftist infighting is, take a look at this week's vote on the Voting Rights Act. It was undone by just 2 senators. Just 2 senators. 2 people couldn't play ball, and so the entire radical left agenda is on hold, more or less indefinitely, until we appease those 2 agendas. You're going to be asked in the next coming year a question fairly frequently. You'll be asked, do you think that Biden compromised too much, or do you think that Biden did not compromise enough? And how you answer the question has largely already been decided for you. If you are on the right wing, the narrative you are going to hear from now until Election Day at increasingly pitchy pitches is going to be that Biden is an uncompromising socialist who will do anything to ram his open border, let everybody vote, socialist, commie agenda, and take away your freedoms. And that is what you're going to hear from the pundits on the right from now until Election Day. It's totally disingenuous, by the way. For some proof of just how disingenuous that is, the politicians who voted against the infrastructure bill that did pass, I'm talking about the bipartisan infrastructure bill that did pass. Several Republicans voted against that bill. They voted against that bill. They tweeted loudly to their followers, and then these tweets were picked up by the news, and they were run as news. This is the most socialist agenda. This is Biden ramming what used to just be theory down our throats and affecting the lives of day-to-day Americans. Well, this week, those same politicians are getting back on Twitter talking about what a game changer the infrastructure bill is. One even took credit saying, I fought front and center for this legislation for you, my dear constituents, except that she didn't, except that she actually voted against that legislation. She called it a socialist takeover prior to it passing. She voted against it. And now she's out there telling her constituents this week what an amazing bill it is. It's only socialist until they're willing to spend the government's money. So you're going to hear Biden is uncompromising if you're on the right. If you're on the moderate Democratic left, you're going to hear an unending drumbeat from the I guess what people would call the mainstream media, and that's an idea that frankly bears a little bit of examination all by itself. But from the mainstream media, you're going to hear a long-suffering, almost martyred tale of how Biden, against all the odds, is struggling, and he's a little weak, but he's getting it done, if only incrementally. And look at what he's already done. And they will point you to his already past accomplishments, because this failure is huge and it's really bad press for them. Now, if you hear progressives, if you listen to the progressive commentators, you're going to hear a completely different story. In their minds, Biden compromised himself before he ever even left the gate. His $6 trillion plan that he campaigned on, he compromised himself down to 3.2 before he even had the bill written. It's like he's like, oh, I know I can't get 6 trillion. Let me do y'all a favor. I'll go down to 3.2. Let's work from there, okay? From 3.2 down to 1.5. So halves again. Now we were at a quarter. And we still can't get there. All that compromise turned out to be unnecessary because none of it passed. But when you're asked to take a position, did Biden compromise too much? Did he not compromise enough? You're being put in this partisan, you guys are over here and you guys are over here. And all of our polls do this to us, not just our polls. Every bit of the media narration based on those polls does this too. 46% of Americans feel that civil war is likely. 43% feel it is unlikely. Where do you fall? Do you think it's inevitable? Has the American government lost its authority and its ability to govern? A whopping 46% of you right now are nodding your heads going, well, I mean, and maybe it hasn't lost it yet, but I mean, we've got corrupt judges, we've got corrupt cops, we've got congressmen going to prison. They can't even rule themselves. How can they rule us? We've got people being shot in the streets. So 46% of you are right now going, maybe it is inevitable. And 43% of you are thinking, well, this is not good, but you know, I mean, it's been tough before. American rhetoric has always been really, really extreme. And that is true historically. If you read the campaign language between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams when they were running against each other, to hear either of them tell it, the other one would have been the absolute end of a fledgling United States. Okay. They accused each other of everything short of treason. And I think actually one of them did accuse the other of treason or something like it. So, yes, Americans have always had very kind of extreme rhetoric. We do. We love our freedom of speech. And we all think we're patriots. Every single one of us convinced that we are standing up for the America that should be. Well, here's the thing about the America that always was and always will be. We are always trying on both sides to be what we should be. Where we have begun to lose cohesion and agreement is what should be looks like and what to do about it. If we can't separate ourselves out by religion, by political faction, by color, by culture, then we are stuck with the same inevitability that we were at the beginning of the last Civil War, at the end of the last Civil War, during the Civil Rights Movement, and after Vietnam. Which is that we have got to figure out how to work together to make the nation run in a way that can work for all of us. Some people do not believe that the United States should be a plurality of diversity. They hear the word celebrate diversity and they see a leftist agenda of pluralism, okay? But diversity also means not allowing one religion to tell everybody how to pray. Diversity also means not allowing just the right people to be here or walk here, but nobody else. The word diversity has become a dirty word on the right, but I think even when they evaluate it, they don't actually want the exclusivity that they are kind of being led into. A world without tequila, a world without that authentic taco stand. Is that really what we want? Some people, yeah. But those people are still in a vast minority. They don't have political power. They don't have the ability to just shake the rest of the country into thinking like they do. And this is another thing that is holding us together. The people who are most authoritarian are also the ones mostly complaining about perceived tyranny. They we like freedom when it applies to us doing what we want to do. We don't like freedom when it allows somebody else to do things we don't approve of. But then when you ask people, well, what are you going to do about it? Most of the time, they don't have an answer. And for all but a very few people, the answer is not, I grab my guns and I start shooting. I've been telling people, one of the reasons, I was asked this a lot during Barack Obama, and the reason during Barack Obama was because it was simultaneous with the global Occupy movement. And during what was Occupy here in the United States, several other countries actually had fairly big social and financial revolutions, including some bloodless revolutions that resulted in real change. And people kept asking Americans, well, how come you guys don't go to civil war? How come you guys aren't doing this thing that we're doing? And the reason that question was coming was because it was coming from people in Europe, where in Europe, they're actually fairly physically close to the people who were making these, like all the financial corruption that was going on here in the United States was also going on in Europe. We weren't the only ones. The scandal from the financial collapse caught a lot of dirty politicians and a lot of dirty bankers playing the same games all over the world that they were playing here. But in other countries, the people were like, oh, okay, you guys are fired and in jail now and that sort of thing. There were consequences. Here we were like, well, we can't be doing that now. Don't do it again. And so Europe, some of the European people I talked to were a little bit puzzled. Hey, how come you guys don't have a civil war? How come you guys aren't doing a revolution? And it's because we didn't have access that same way. Our elites, our rulers, literally live in boathouses. They stay in hotel rooms. They are in ivory towers whose addresses we don't know. They don't live in our neighborhoods. And it's one thing to be mad at the bank for what the bank does, but it's another thing to take that problem that you have with the bank to the teller who works for middle-class wages, actually low middle-class wages. If it's just an average teller at your local branch, they're not making that much money. They don't make $25, $30 an hour. Okay, they're not rolling in dough. They're in the same financial class you are. They go to the same church you do. That's why we haven't had a civil war. Because who are we fighting? We'd be fighting ourselves. Here's what is likely. As economic conditions continue to worsen, and right now there isn't any indication that the disparity at the income inequality is going to narrow anytime soon. Okay. Every single bill that seeks to address that growing inequality, that seeks to bring that together in any measure, is immediately labeled as socialist, not because it actually is socialist. That would be workers seizing the means of production. Socialism has a definition. But it will be labeled that way because there will always be people who will fall for that. It's the socialist commie agenda. They don't even need to know what the words mean to know that they fear those words. And there isn't any indication right now that any of those bills that might address the tax system inequalities that both sides are aware of, we acknowledge that they exist. We just don't know. Either we don't know what to do about it, or and what's really the case is those who have the power to do something about it are absolutely unwilling to address it. And their laundry list of excuses is really all just BS cover for their corruption. They're making a lot of money on that corruption staying exactly as it is. So as income inequality gets worse, people are going to feel more and more like the government has abandoned them. And that brings us to the more prescient possibility of something like a civil war. Because there is an argument to be made that we're sort of already in one. It's mostly a war of words. Well, I don't know if y'all know this, but wars are generally preceded with wars of words. And we are deep in the middle of the rhetorical war. And it's just getting worse. But also, legitimate violence has already stemmed from that rhetoric. There was the attempt to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. There were the deaths that resulted from January 6th. There were deaths that resulted from Black Lives Matter. I don't recall whether there were any deaths associated with either Standing Rock or Occupy, but it wouldn't surprise me. People were maimed. People were injured. Lives were destroyed. The civil unrest part is already here. Study after study has shown that right-wing extremism is far more given to legitimate violence. They just have a higher body count. They are slightly better armed, and they are slightly better organized. The left wing is nearly as well armed, but it does seem that they are slower to pick up the idea that violence is the only possible way out of this. So you have some people kind of already like, let's just go for it. Let's get it over already. We saw an interview. I hope everybody here was equally shocked by the interview that, by the video of that guy asking Charlie Kirk. So I just want to know, when do we get the guns? I hope we were all equally shocked by that. But that is a sizable percentage of the right wing. Here is the fortunate news. It is not, in fact, the vast majority of the right wing. And it's not, unlike in the previous Civil War, it's not being backed by a legal coalition of states, right? So when South Carolina seceded, its legislature chose to secede. The police were backing it. The government was backing that move. Right now, what we have, fortunately, are factions. And that is fortunately also because of the current landscape of the United States, all we are likely to have. You're going to get more factions like the Oath Keepers, or on the left, factions like the Black Panthers. You're going to see groups forming up and more coalitions, more militias, and those groups are more likely to become involved in skirmishes. Death can result. But are we going to collapse into full-on civil conflict? Maybe not, and probably not. Everybody's regional needs are different. What people think is going on is different. We don't have clear lines of battle. And we don't have any clear idea of what to do next. The United States is tired of war. One of the reasons that Biden took a lot of flack this week, he said, and I agree with progressives on this, this was a really moronic thing to say. He said that if there was a minor incursion into Ukraine, the United States probably wouldn't do so much. To which Ukraine rightfully responded, there's no such thing as a minor incursion. It's either an incursion or it's not an incursion. We take them all pretty seriously, which, if this were U.S. soil, I'm guessing is a position Biden would agree with. But the reason that he said it, and he had to come back and he had to talk about why he had said it that way, is because poll after poll shows that Americans have lost their taste for foreign conflict. We would rather attend our own garden just about now. That's hopeful. We would like to see the tax situation addressed rationally, meaningfully, not in a partisan way. We want our government to be able to do the most radical thing of all, which is to say, yes, we're going to use your taxes to build beautiful cities and provide lots of opportunities so that each and every one of you, whether you're a little black girl in the Bronx, whether you're a white kid, redhead with freckles, born on a sheep farm, far from any Ivy League school, whether you're gay, whether you were not born here, if you come here, this government, it cares what happens to its citizens. We use your taxes to benefit your lives. But Biden explained, we wanted out of Afghanistan. In fact, we wanted out of Afghanistan from the moment we elected Barack Obama. Bring the troops home. Get those boots off the ground. It was an imperative. We told Obama to do this. He didn't do it. Ticked off progressives to no end. You know, people on the right like to classify Obama as the most socialist president that ever was, whereas progressives are like, are you kidding? This lackluster dude who couldn't figure out how to not go to war and spend trillions and trillions of dollars? And that brings us down to the sticker price. So if we just left Afghanistan and we're not spending a couple of $1 trillion a week in Afghanistan. Why do we not have the money for a $6 trillion infrastructure package? One thing's for sure, as long as Americans have to ask that question and cannot get rational, reasonable answers from their government that make sense to them, that sense of unease, that sense that it might all fall apart, that democracy as we know it is over, that our civilization as we know it is crumbling, is going to continue to press on us. But it's probably not going to break out in all-out civil war. It's probably going to break out in crime, in desperation, in more militias, in more demonstrations. It is slowly but surely leading us to take further and further legal actions that bring us further away from a democracy and closer to an authoritarian system of government. Traditionally, the United States has ranked at a +10 on the democracy scale, which was as democratic could always be. That scale's been going on for decades and decades, and the United States has always been shining at the tippy top of that list. Till recently, we've dropped down to a +5 on the democracy scale. And I'm just going to take a wild gander here, but I'm thinking that my friends on the right, some of whom may be watching this show tonight, aren't actually any more thrilled with the fact that it is objectively true that the United States is more authoritarian now than it used to be. People who depend on freedom and democracy have to be willing to fight for everybody's freedom and democracy. Otherwise, we are tacitly saying, yeah, I'm fine with authoritarianism, just so long as I'm the one in charge. If you harbor any illusions that you can do that and just be an authoritarian or have an authoritarian government with just your kind of people who agree with you, then I challenge you to find a single example of it in any country in history. The human spirit isn't that clear. Catalonia is still fighting for independence from Spain. It's largely a political fight. It's largely a fight of rhetoric. It's not a shooting war. It's still very real. Hawaii, which was illegally annexed by the United States, is very much like to be unannexed now. And even they're not calling for civil war against the United States. So if you have any fears that we are, in fact, headed down that path, I think safely you can put them down. The fear is that we won't be able to find a way to work together quickly, that we won't be able to see past the made-up partisan fights that we're told to fight about in order to find what we all actually need. My friends on the right are just as angry with corporate rule as my friends on the left. That is an area people have in common. We know that the corporations should not have such a huge hand in running our entire quality of life. We know that. Another place where there's common ground, both the left and the right know and agree that the current congressional system, the current judiciary system, are corrupt. In fact, the only people who express any faith in the institutions and systems as they are right now are those people who are still making money and benefiting from those institutions. And because they've been working so hard to consolidate their power, that number is getting fewer and fewer, less and less every year. And they're starting to sound less and less convincing to everybody else who's been left on the outside. So we have an opportunity now, and we have every single day that we wake up, we have an opportunity to say, I am going to stand up for my country. This is my country, and I am a patriot. And I don't think that standing up for my country means blasting the other dude in the face because he's waving a different flag than me. Now, actual insurrectionists, people who actually want to go out there and instigate this civil war, they exist. They exist on the left and they exist on the right. And they're deadly serious. And they're building little militias and they are building little armies. But again, fortunately, while they may be able to commit some acts of terrorism and some terrible crimes, they're not being backed by anybody. And so their ability to force the entire country into a state of civil war is really, really limited. And most of them, additionally, are not fighting for anything. They're fighting for an end to corruption. They're fighting to tear it down. A lot of people who want to fight just know what's wrong. But I'm not hearing any proposals about what to build next. And this is the other thing that gives rational people, i.e. most of us, a lot of room to sit on our hands while other people call for violence and say, okay, but then you going to do it better? How do we do it better? If you don't want a democracy, what do you want? If you don't want a republic, what do you want? How would you build your country? Oh, you don't necessarily think that you'd be the best ruler either? It's probably because you're rational. It's hard to run a country. It's hard to legislate and govern. Those aren't easy tasks. And even building the system that other people would acknowledge and then follow along, like cooperate with your system, that's not an easy task either. Everything is held together because we tacitly give it permission to hold together every single day. And we do that because we know that the moment we stop doing that, grandma doesn't get her diabetes medication and she passes away. Our kids can't get their hearing aids. The people we love and care about are suddenly in danger. Now, I have some friends on the right, and one of them in particular says something to me on a regular basis that gives me so much hope. He says, come Der Tag, we'll shoot over each other's heads. This is why we don't actually need to fear civil war right now, as much as you're going to hear the drums of war beating for a while, mostly due to that poll that everybody's talking about. Because we all have somebody that we know on the wrong side of the fence that we'd never shoot in the face. We just wouldn't. We're not out there to attack everybody who thinks differently than we are. And most of my viewers here are going to be on the left. It says in the description, it's, progressive politics. So I doubt I have a whole lot of right-wing viewers. But I'm sure I have some. And we all know that we've got at least one friend whose politics we can't stand. Oh, they're on the wrong side of history, but gosh, I love them. My great-great-aunt Fern was known to say, and this is like in the 30s and 40s, she was known to say that if you were a Republican, you were automatically a racist. She believed that. I don't believe that. But she did. And if we can get past that kind of labeling if we can start talking to each other about the issues and the solutions rather than the labels, then I think we're going to find out the thing that has been true all along. We're all Americans. We love our freedom of speech. We want our country to succeed. We want to stand up again and say that we're proud to be Americans. We want to be an example of freedom and opportunity and prosperity and peace to the world. We just need to talk it out. I've encouraged everybody to watch the mainstream media news, and I'm still going to keep encouraging that. But I also want to discourage everyone from giving the people who say the most outrageous things so much room for breath. Every time we have a partisan conversation about guns and gun legislation, it turns into this horrendous bickering. The left wants to take your guns. The right wants 5-year-olds to be able to carry guns to school. Neither position is true. But because the media forces us into these hard corners and then lets us fight like children, we tend to go along with that unthinking. If we instead say, okay, gun violence is a real problem. We need to protect our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, because the timeless principles that created the idea that we should be able to protect ourselves either from a tyrannical government, our own, or somebody else's, that's thinking that cannot be completely dismissed and ignored, right? But does the right wing necessarily want, everybody walking around armed to the teeth? Are they going to be happy with the idea of the Black Panthers walking into, Home Depot for the weekend to pick up painting supplies for the house, strapped with AR-15s? Our police shoot Black people just for having a gun, even in open carry states, even when the gun isn't real in an open carry state. The state of Texas went so far as to create, they basically took away a restriction. You no longer have to have the same kind of licensing you used to have to in order to just carry your gun everywhere. And there are a lot of Second Amendment advocates. There are a lot of people on the right. There are a lot of gun advocates like, now, hold on there. We didn't say we needed less restrictions. Do we really want every single crackhead on these streets to be able to pick up a gun and just walk into Walmart with it? No, probably not. So there is room, and we all know that there is room to have a rational discussion about what real gun legislation needs to look like. We also do not let people just walk around with hand grenades and suitcase bombs either. Nobody claims that your Second Amendment rights are being stomped on because you're not allowed to, just walk around the Mall of America with a Tommy gun. It's only when we allow the media to set up these very, very polar opposite positions and then pit us against each other that we find ourselves suddenly asking, is it almost all over? Are we done? Is the rule of law done? No, the rule of law isn't done. Rest assured, the other side very much wants to hold you accountable to the rule of law. It doesn't matter which side you're on. The other side is very much going to try to hold you accountable to the rule of law. And as long as that is the case, then we are all tacitly implying that the rule of law is still something that we are agreeing to. Now, we do need to address those laws. We have created a situation where the rich are going to get richer, where the laws do not apply evenly to the rich or to the powerful or to the famous. We have a system where some people go to jail or prison even for years for minor offenses, and other people commit violent, heinous, criminal acts and get away with probation, slap on the wrist. There's no consistency in the justice system. There's no fairness in the tax system. There's conversations to be had about every single institution in the country. There isn't one that is working as designed. We can have those conversations. But we have to acknowledge the fact that in order to have those conversations, we need to put down the heavy rhetoric that assumes that the end of all of this is a civil war. Because you don't want that for your grandma. You don't. You don't want that for your grandma. You don't want that for your girlfriend. You don't want that for your kids. Ideas may be worth dying for. But people die and ideas live. We know ideas live because there are still people who believe the earth is flat. Ideas don't die, even when they really should. There are no ideas that are worth us allowing innocent people to suffer and die so that we can have our way. People who talk about war are psychopaths. I'm just going to say that straight up. I have never been in a war zone. The closest I've been to a war zone was that when I was a little kid, my dad took me to South Korea. And at the very far edge of this one city, I don't even know what the name of the city is. I was a little kid. Could see the wall way off in the distance, the DMZ. I wasn't even close enough to see it. Like I couldn't actually even see the soldiers on it. It was too far away. Of course, my dad wouldn't let me go anywhere near there. That's the closest I've been to a war zone. But I've read a lot of books about it, and I've talked to people who've been in war, and the one thing that they all have in common is that they'll tell you, you don't want to do that. Nobody who wants conflict and war is anything but a psychopath. This isn't the way we want our country to be. We can have conversations about what it is we want and what it is we need. We can have elections. We can even have fights. We can have demonstrations. We can have protests. But we don't want a war. And I really hope you walk away from this episode tonight knowing that your fellow American is not necessarily gleeful about an impending civil war. They're mostly just terrified of it, or they feel that it is unfortunately necessary. But almost nobody's running out there and calling for it. Those that are on both sides are in the minority, and we do not have to give them air, space, or power. What we can do, what we must do, is have honest conversations about the direction the country does need to go. And that means not just the Democrats saying, we want this, we want this, we want this, we want this. I heard Biden's Build Back Better plan characterized as a liberal wish list. It isn't, actually. It was filled with, like I said, Biden compromised right out the gate on his own bill. It was actually filled with Republican gimmies that also did not pass. But we can start elevating the voices of Republican leaders who have real agendas and real issues that they want solved for their constituents. We can have a conversation about voter IDs. We can acknowledge that the voter ID system, as it has historically been, has always been designed to keep certain portions of the population from voting. And also acknowledge that a national streamlined, easily, we identify this citizen, this vote, one citizen, one vote, is a rational ask. Those are conversations we can have. We can have conversations about the tax system. Other conversations are going to be harder. Okay? Conversation about abortion is going to be a hard one because we have a conflict not just of problem solution, but that particular issue gets very wrapped up with some people's moral and religious beliefs. To dismiss them entirely, to make them belittled and small, to other them and make them a minority, doesn't do anything to bring them to a place where they can be comfortable with the laws. It doesn't. We can and we should find solutions to work together. And do not get me wrong, I don't have my glasses on. I'm going to take a few minutes here to read the comments. I know I've already gone over, but I am going to take a few minutes to read over you guys' comments here in a minute. But we can start that conversation by trolling each other less, by giving credit where credit is due, by saying, I think Aunt Jenny is wrong top to bottom, but you know what? She's right about, it's not right that Warren Buffett pays less in taxes than his own secretary. We can have conversations about freedom versus authoritarianism. Where's the line? All societies need order. We're not anarchies. But where is the line between order and freedom? Some of those conversations will always be tough. As long as we're still talking, we're still Americans. As long as we're still trying to come up with solutions, hashing it out in the public forum, well, that's about as American as it gets. When we pick up weapons and we decide to try to make our point through bloodshed, we relinquish our rights as citizens with an equal say in this country, and also our status as rational human beings. There's a reason that murder gets you put in jail. I don't see any reason why murder on a mass scale shouldn't also get you put in jail. It's all wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and get to these comments. And thank you guys all so much for sticking with me again tonight. I'm because I didn't have my glasses on this whole show, I'm going to have to come all the way up to the very top and play the game. Where did Liz put her glasses? Oh man, I so had them. Hey there. Behind you, Liz. Ooh, super dirty. Okay. We need, so Fred Eater, thank you again for being here again this week. We need to get over the idea of us versus them. There is no them. We are all us. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. You put it absolutely perfectly as you Always do. Um, we're all living on this rock, tumbling through space. We're all human. Yep, that's exactly it. Oh, um, okay. Wade Clements. Biden is not a commie by any stretch. That's correct. He's not. Even my boy Tucker doesn't call the current regime socialist. No, Tucker actually specifically has been careful not to use that word, and that's because Tucker is when Tucker Carlson lies, it's often using truthful statements in a misleading way. So he would not use a word like socialist. Actually, unfortunately, the commie socialist rhetoric is coming right out of the Congress. That's stuff coming out of not so much commentators' mouths as legislators' mouths, and then it's repeated by constituents. But fortunately, very few of the media pundits are actually using that kind of terminology. Wade Clements, and this is something you guys are going to see a lot more of if you're not seeing it already. The American government has completely lost its authority to govern. It hasn't lost its authority, but it is rapidly losing in places its will and ability. We have laws we don't enforce. We have laws we can't enforce. We have laws that maybe we'll enforce sometimes over here. Maybe we'll, as long as any of us are acknowledging that, we got to pay taxes and drive on the left side of the road and buckle up for safety, it hasn't actually lost its authority. Who's to say we can't separate ourselves? It's really about pragmatism. Who's going to go where? And who gets to tell people, you have to go here, you have to go here, you have to go here, you have to go here. We're not going to separate ourselves because it is not within human nature to separate ourselves from our families, our friends, and our communities, even if their political opinions don't align with our own. Okay. In the Civil War, the whole reason we had brother against brother, father against son, was because within a single family, you can have wildly different political opinions. So when you say, who's to say we can't separate ourselves out? It's because you literally can't. Separate yourself out where? Who? Yeah, and Wade, this is another interesting comment. Not grab guns and start shooting, just break away. Let everyone live separately in peace. Look at Czechoslovakia. Velvet divorce. Okay. So that really wasn't so velvet. We could argue maybe another time about characterizing it that way. However, again, you can't just separate. There are there's like pragmatic reasons why a velvet divorce isn't going to work. And here's one of the pragmatic reasons, okay? You guys have all heard about this. A politician will get up there and they'll criticize federal emergency funding going to a different state, right? So if a state winds up getting hit by a hurricane, sometimes senators from another state will be like, we shouldn't be spending all this money, and we got the deficit to think about. Incidentally, it's been about 2.5 years since I looked at the national deficit. When I last looked, it was $21 trillion. And if that number rings interestingly to you from about that time, it's because $21 trillion is the same amount of money that the Pentagon had to admit that it lost in its own audit. So we talk about, $6 trillion to spend on infrastructure and the American people is such a huge ask. Okay, no, the Pentagon lost $21 trillion. Just lost it, poof. We don't know where we put it. How do you lose $21 trillion? I guess you bury bombs in other countries and then forget where you put them. That's one way. No, a velvet divorce is just practically impossible. It won't happen. Who's going to give up on getting those federal aid dollars when they want them? Other people can criticize the federal aid dollars, but when it's your turn, when your state is the one buried under snow, burned to a crisp, flooding, suddenly you want that federal aid. You want the strength of the American people. We pull together. Americans from all over the country pulled together after Hurricane Katrina. Americans from all over the country pulled together after fires devastated California. People aren't going to leave comfort. Fred Eater, we're too diverse to manage a civil war in the traditional sense. You can't pit one state against another. Too many people on both sides in every state. And that's exactly it. We're all mixed up. We are entangled. Okay. At this point, one of the reasons we can't do a velvet divorce is because it's like asking us to take the salt out of the water after we put it in and then boil the water for 10 minutes. This time it'll be way messier. Yes, if things devolve into real civil unrest, people fighting in the streets, it will be far messier. We are looking at a lot more death. Read Machiavelli. Yes, read Machiavelli. Just like, if you don't know who that is, look it up. If you have not read Machiavelli, do it. If corporations are people, Richard McQuaid, thank you for being here tonight, Richard. If corporations are people, they should follow the same rules and laws as any other person. I agree if they were people, but of course they actually are not. And if there's one piece of legislation, again, here's another place. Every now and again, and they always distract us from these places where we kind of all largely agree. I don't know anybody, left, right, or center, who thinks that Citizens United is a good idea. The people didn't vote on Citizens United. Citizens United was a Supreme Court decision. That didn't come down to the will or the vote of the people. That was a decision by Supreme Court justices. And it's been kicking our butts ever since. Let's see here. We've got Fred Eater. Many of my biggest supporters on Patreon are conservatives, and they recognize I'm an idealist. We disagree kindly. We all want to preserve our country. That's it. We all want the America that we think is best. Now we just need to find out what we do agree on and build from there. Yes. That sounds idealistic, but actually, I don't mean it to be idealistic. I'm speaking pragmatically. I'm speaking pragmatically because the option is criminal destruction and degradation of civilization as we understand it. And we're not going to do that. We've got all this amazing tech we are building. We have new inventions, new innovation. We are in a technological leap forward. That technological leap forward is going to want to carry us, and it doesn't care. Technology and money don't care what you and I think about gun control or abortion rights at all. We are now a far okay, I'm going to really mispronounce this handle, and I apologize. Iramet I'm so sorry. We are now a far, far more mobile nation than we were in the 19th century. Libs keep moving to Austin, Atlanta. Texans and Georgians will move to Tennessee and Wisconsin. We are more mobile, but we do have these population centers within other population centers. So, bringing up Austin is an absolute, that's a perfect example. Texas is as red can be. Austin is sort of notoriously blue, right in the middle of bright red Texas. And I have friends. I have a friend who told me actually just this week that he moved from Tennessee to Texas, and they're a little more. They're actually a little bit less conservative in Tennessee than maybe the mainstream media would paint the picture. And so he had this idea that he was going to move to Texas and everything as far as social services and stuff were just going to be impossible. And he wound up moving to Austin, and things were actually so much better than he'd been expecting. The reason that's happening is because the media isn't being terribly forthright about how much damage they're doing stereotyping. We get the everything's bigger in Texas stereotype. We get the them's just hillbillies, them and them Tar Heels, and the pie in the sky idealistic radical hippies in Oregon. And none of those pictures, as stereotypical as they are, actually are reflective of the real population when you get right down to it. Huge swatches of Oregon are really, really, really red. Like, you go like 2 towns over, you're going to find nothing but Republicans. Whole towns of nothing but Republicans. You can't judge all of Oregon by Portland and Eugene, which are, huge liberal centers. Obergefell was also a Supreme Court decision that's been kicking our butts ever since. John Harbeck, you leave it in your other bunker? Nightcap doesn't speak Latin. No, I don't. I know a few choice Latin phrases. Occasionally I'll look stuff up in Latin. Oh my goodness, somebody's at the door and actually opened the door to say hello. Just a minute. I'm going to answer my back door.
I got it.
Oh, okay. Okay, my roomie's got it. I heard the knock, but I thought, it was just a delivery guy, so I was going to ignore it. No, I don't. The only thing I know how to say in Latin is sine qua non, which basically means without which nothing. And ad astra per amor, which means to the stars with love, which is what I say to my atheist friends, or for my atheist friends when they pass on. That's it. That's the... Oh! Okay. Or a stately raven. Now I get it. Okay. So, again, we went way over tonight. I appreciate you guys sticking with me and being here. That actually brings up, I'm not going to try to restrict myself to an hour anymore. I am going to work on continuing to be better prepared. And next week's episode is likely to actually be kind of a continuation of this ongoing issue. What do we do about, I feel like I did not tonight adequately address our fears about the way our society is breaking down, why it's breaking down, and more importantly, what we can actually do about it. So next week's episode will probably be a continuation of this week's episode, and I'm not going to worry so much about the 1 hour time limit, although that is still, the idea. But thank you all so much for being here. I will let you all go. Have a wonderful weekend. Be safe, be well, and of course, as always, live long and prosper. Good night.